name is Jay Astle. I am the town arborist for Brunswick. I'm also the Parks and Facilities Manager. So I get to see both sides of the problem in Brunswick in terms of browntail moth. Not only the problem itself, but also how it affects people, meaning people that are visiting all of our public spaces, parks, playgrounds, athletic facilities that are impacted by browntail moth. Not only am I worried about the caterpillar itself and the tree health, but I'm also worried about all of those people that are using our facilities. I've got a somewhat brief slideshow that I'll go through, and I'll talk about browntail moth identification, what it is, what the problem with browntail moth is, and then we'll go through about what the town of Brunswick has done over the last 4 months, well, actually closer to 6 to 8 months as it relates to browntail moth. And then we'll get into some things that you can do in terms of helping address the problem of browntail moth, things we can do if you come into contact with the hairs of browntail moth. And I'm sure, like most groups that I talk to, everybody probably has at least a handful of questions that they already want to ask. I'll try to address some of them as I go through the presentation, but I'm almost certain that whatever I talk about will elicit even more questions. So I've left plenty of time for questions at the end. Don't be bashful about asking questions. There's no silly or dumb questions. I'm happy to answer everything. It's a little confusing when you're talking about an insect like browntail moth where there isn't a lot of research out there. There's not a lot of information known about it. So again, there's no dumb questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions. With that, I'll get into the presentation. If you have a question as I'm talking about something that I'm talking about, please just shout it out. There's not many of you here, it's okay. You don't need to raise your hand. But if it's a more general question or I'm not talking about that topic specifically, if you could wait to the end just so we can keep it moving, then we'll turn the lights back on. You can see me. I'll be able to address your questions one by one. Sound okay? Great. And I am handing around a brochure that the state puts out. It's pretty informative in terms of browntail moth, what it is, what the problem is, how to address it. And then the yellow sheet that I handed out is actually a document that's developed by a group called the Mid-Coast Maine Browntail Moth Support Group. They've got some helpful tips there in terms of what you can do to avoid coming into contact with the browntail moth hairs, as well as some remedies once you have come into contact with them. And if I guess I can get the this out here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's perfect. I was already. Oh, is that okay on both? I don't want to put anybody to sleep. All right. Just to confirm, everyone's awake right now, correct?
Yeah.
We'll check periodically just to make sure. Oh, I'll go back. So the reason I have a caterpillar with a knife and fork is because they're voracious eaters. They will quickly defoliate a tree. I thought that was somewhat funny. He looks a lot more menacing than the actual caterpillar does itself. So again, I'll talk about browntail moth in general. I'll talk about what the town of Brunswick did in response this past year. We'll talk about where we are right now, July 2017. We'll talk about how things look for next year. And then we'll talk about some things that you can do as individuals and working together. And then, as I said, we'll have questions and hopefully answers at the end. I have a picture of some leaves that have been eaten by browntail moth, just to give you a sense. If you haven't already seen them out in the wild, that's what the leaves will look like until there's nothing left except the stem of the leaf. Here's your first test. Everybody still awake? So one of the most important things for browntail moth is identifying that it's a browntail moth caterpillar. Here are 4 caterpillars that you can probably see in Brunswick anywhere from late April through June into July. From a distance, all caterpillars look the same. They just look like a hairy caterpillar crawling on the ground or on the tree. but not all caterpillars are the same. Browntail moth is the only one that has toxic hairs or that affect people. So by a show of hands, how many people think that A is a browntail moth caterpillar? Good. As we're doing 100% so far. How about B? Okay, a lot of people think it's B. What about C? And finally D. Those of you that said D are wrong. It's B. I actually gave a little hint. B for browntail. So the hallmark identifying feature of a browntail moth caterpillar are the two reddish-orange spots on its tail end. It's got the two white lines on its outside lateral sides, but it's the two orange dots that will immediately make them recognizable. And even when they're very young, the juvenile caterpillars, they have that same hallmark two dots. And they're always orangish, reddish orange. These other caterpillars, again, you'll see them everywhere. It's okay to freak out about caterpillars if you just freak out about squiggly, hairy, crawly things. But you don't need
when they don't hurt you.
exactly. You don't need to worry about A, C, or D. It's B that you're worried about. So A is an eastern tent caterpillar. C is a forest tent caterpillar, and D is a gypsy moth caterpillar. I usually think of the gypsy moth caterpillar as bright and colorful. It has a bunch of red spots, and those up towards its head are kind of a bluish gray. So they're very pretty when it's made of gypsy tapestries or something. But that's one easy way to remember and identify them. Again, so that's one of the most important things is identifying what the pest is, because that will dictate whether you care enough about it to do anything or whether you don't. And they all eat leaves, so even if you're seeing some defoliation in your trees, it's not necessarily a browntail moth caterpillar. The nests of the browntail moth caterpillar are very unique, very different than any other caterpillar's nest. They build their nest in tightly woven globules at the end of branches. They look like cotton balls from a distance. If you're looking at a tree, you see what looks like some tufts of white or grayish at the ends of the branches. That's a browntail moth caterpillar nest. They look a little bit different when you're up close. The one on the left is a fairly large one and very tightly woven. The one in the upper right is a loosely constructed nest, and that bottom one is a combination of a couple of nests, but they're always at the ends of branches. It doesn't matter what type of tree that you see it in, if it's at the end of a branch, it's more than likely a browntail moth caterpillar nest. To contrast that, these are other caterpillar nests. They look very different. They're almost always in the crotches of branches in trees. Browntail moth caterpillars do not build their nests in the crotches of trees. They're at the end of the branches. So these are a combination of forest tent caterpillar, eastern tent caterpillar, gypsy moth caterpillars. They all build their nests similar to this, and they're much larger than a browntail moth caterpillar nest. They're very social animals, caterpillars are in general, so that's why you see them all together. A mass of eggs from browntail moth caterpillar can be anywhere from 25 to 400 caterpillars that hatch from the eggs of a single female moth. And occasionally you'll have joining of forces, so the egg masses that hatch will often congregate together with other egg masses, and they'll have larger nests that can host significantly more caterpillars. That's a good
They're
question.
shaped like cotton balls. Are they the size of cotton balls?
No, they're about the size of my fist.
Okay.
Typically, you won't see them any bigger than that, but they're very noticeable. From the ground, when you're looking up into the canopy of a large oak tree, or crab apples, or apple, or pear, or cherry trees, they just look like little globules. And they're white, and they're a silver, kind of shiny silverish color. Occasionally they'll glisten in the sunlight. In the wintertime, that's a really easy way to identify them. So again, the brown-tailed moth caterpillars are build their nests at the end of branches. Other caterpillars build them in the crotches of branches. And they usually congregate in their infancy, they congregate on the outside of the nest. During the daytime, they're sunning themselves, they're hanging around their nests for safety, being aware of predators. But they typically feed at night, again, for safety.
So you're not have to see them walking on the ground during the day?
That's a hard one to ask. Typically, you would not see them on the ground. However, they do fall out of trees. That's usually why you see any caterpillar on the ground. Is not because he wants to be there, but because he ended up there. And then if he's walking around looking for his food source, they'll be looking for trees to start climbing up to get back into the canopy to find their food source. But yeah, they don't live on the ground. These caterpillars, tent caterpillars, eastern and forest, as well as the gypsy moth caterpillars and the brown-tailed moth, their food is leaves. So that's where they're going to be. They're not down the grass, hanging out in the dirt, or eating grass blades. They're looking for leaves of specific types of trees. These are the mature moths. So after the caterpillar pupates, which means it builds a cocoon, goes into the cocoon, after about 18 to 20 days, it emerges as a mature moth. That's what the moth looks like. It's white, it's not brown, it's white, and it's got a little kind of tawny tuft at its tail it's a collection of the hairs, of the brown hairs that give it its name. It's kind of a weird looking moth when you see it on a wall or on the side of a building or on the sidewalk. Meaning it usually doesn't, in that lower picture where it's got its wings out, it usually does, that's when it's crawling, it's got its wings out. In the upper left, at rest, it just looks like a slender kind of tube of white with 4 hairy arms. So this is what you'll be seeing. If you haven't already seen them now, you'll start seeing them over the next couple of weeks as they transform into the moth form. The males and females will start looking for appropriate mates. As soon as the female is ready to lay her eggs, she will fly. Unlike other female moths that don't fly, like the winter moth female doesn't fly, it has to crawl where it's going, has to crawl up the tree, the trunk of the tree. And a female brown-tailed moth can fly. So as soon as she's mated, she will fly up into the canopy of a tree. She'll lay her eggs on the underside of a leaf, far out of the reach of anybody in this room. And at about probably another 2 weeks to 17 days later, those eggs will hatch. Anywhere from 25 to 250, 300 eggs will hatch from a single female. And all of those eggs that hatch turn into little tiny caterpillars. They'll begin feeding in the middle of August. They'll feed for about a week to 10 days. And then they will start building their winter nests. They will usually retire to their nests about the beginning of September. It's based on temperature. So that's their signal of when they need to hunker down. And then they will stay there all winter until the spring.
Do they stay in relatively the same area?
Meaning, another way to ask that, I guess, is does the female travel?
Yeah, that's the next question.
They'll stay in the general vicinity. They can fly, and if they've got a good wind current, they can fly farther. If they hitch a ride on a pickup truck, they can travel much farther. But within reason, yeah, I think that's safe to say. They stay in the general area, meaning not necessarily within 100-foot radius, but probably within 1,000, 2,000-foot radius. They're not going to travel much more than that. And what they're really looking for is an appropriate place the female is looking for an appropriate place to lay her eggs. That's typically on an oak tree or an apple tree, crab apple tree, because that's their favorite food source. So she's laying the eggs on these trees so that when the eggs hatch into the larva of the caterpillar, they have a ready source of food as soon as they hatch, which is what they need. Just to give an idea about the historical extent, they were introduced into the U.S. in 1897 in Massachusetts, Somerville. I guess everybody knows Massachusetts, just north of Boston. It spread to Cape Cod and up into Maine. You can see in the early part of the 1900s, the extent of them was pretty large. They were over most of New England and up into Canada. That has since reduced, and now the only places that have identified populations are us here in the coast, lucky us, and Cape Cod, outer Cape Cod. Nobody else has them. And unfortunately, it's a pretty extreme problem here, but there's not a lot of research being done on it except within University of Maine. But there's not a lot of research done nationally or internationally because it's not a problem.
If Nova Scotia did something to eliminate them, according to what I read, couldn't we do what they?
Well, part of it was there was a dieback, a natural dieback in 1922 that all that eliminated the population elsewhere. There are little pockets of tests that different areas use to try to control them. That included releasing certain types of fungi and bacteria, but there's no definitive research done about whether that was really the cause of the dieback or what the efficacy of those attempts were.
I read that they also let loose some type of animal, I'm talking about small, that ate them. So.
Yeah, it seemed like early in the 1900s there was a little bit more research being done in terms of what natural controls exist out there. There's not a lot of known predators of browntail moth. Birds will eat other caterpillars, gypsy moth, eastern tent caterpillar, forest tent caterpillar. They're a good food source, and in that way they're very beneficial. But birds don't like the taste of browntail moth caterpillars. So the impact of browntail moth, there are two primary impacts, public health and tree health. On the public health side, there's the microscopic hairs. That's actually not the brown hairs that you see, and that's a misconception of the browntail moth caterpillars, and everybody thinks that it's the amber brown hairs that are the problem. They're actually microscopic, you can't see them. They're only on a certain part of their body. But the hairs are unique in that they have two mechanisms with which they interact with you. Unfortunately, there's a mechanical interaction where they've got arms on the end of them that will irritate your skin once they get stuck in them. And it just gets exacerbated the more that the hair moves around in your skin. Then there's the chemical irritation, which is the toxin that's contained in the hollowed out portion of the hair that also causes a reaction with people. And the reaction, not so much the mechanical reaction, but the chemical reaction in people varies quite a bit. Some people, they'll just get like a little red dot, like almost like a small bug bite on their body, and then other people will develop what I would call more hive-like, so raised redness in the area. And if you have a lot of the hairs, then you can see this gentleman on his forearm. It can be a minor nuisance to some people. It can be extremely painful and irritating to other people. It's like most aspects of health. It varies person to person on how it affects them. There are respiratory problems with people that inhale the toxic hairs. It tends to be worse in people that already have respiratory issues. So people that have asthma would be more likely to be affected by inhalation of the hairs. And the hairs are out and about. The caterpillars will go through, the males go through 5 stages, the females go through 6 stages, but at each stage in their life, the caterpillar sheds its skin, and when it sheds its skin, some of those hairs break off or come off. Because they're so small and so lightweight, they're very easily carried by the wind. So when they die, excuse me, not when they die, when they're shedding their skin, and then of course when they die, those hairs are released into the environment. Every time you mow your lawn, and Hammer mows his or her lawn, it kicks out the hairs, they can get blown around. The toxin remains viable for anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So even if we right now eradicated all browntail moths, it would still be a problem. We'd still experience problems a couple years from now, just because of the amount of hairs that are out. They settle on the ground, wind will kick them up. As you're in your yard working or sitting in your lawn chair, mowing the lawn, doing any type of yard work, you are exposing yourself to the hairs. So it's unfortunately a fairly inescapable problem unless by some luck you don't have any oak trees, predominantly oak trees in your vicinity. The other important aspect of the caterpillars is, as I mentioned, they eat quite a bit. Collectively, they can completely defoliate a tree. That's important in terms of tree health. For a tree that's out in the middle of the forest, we probably don't care too much. Me as a person probably don't care too much about that because there's other trees around. But if you picture some of the trees on the lower mall by the gazebo, if some of those got defoliated year after year, they will eventually they would die. So they caterpillars. Really quickly, I've already talked a little bit about the life cycle of the moth. So right now, the caterpillars are pupating, they'll turn into moths. They're going to mate over the next couple of weeks. So beginning of August, eggs are going to be laid on the underside of leaves, up in the tree canopy, far from reach. These eggs are going to hatch into little tiny millimeter-sized caterpillars. These caterpillars will they'll usually congregate on leaves. They won't eat the entire leaf. That's what's called, they'll end up skeletonizing the leaf. One of the hallmark signs of juvenile caterpillar activity is they're not mature enough to digest the hard stems within the veins of the leaf. So they eat just the soft fleshy part and leave what looks like a skeleton on a leaf. Anyway, they'll feed for 10-14 days. They'll hunker down into their winter nests that they've spun. Each nest can have several hundred juvenile caterpillars in it. They will overwinter in that form in their nest until the spring. That's different than other caterpillars that are where the eggs overwinter and they hatch. This caterpillar overwinters as a juvenile caterpillar. And then in about April, based on temperature and sunlight, they will migrate out of their winter nests. They will start feeding, and as they increase their growth over the next 4 to 6 weeks, from the end of April and through May to the beginning of June, their appetite grows significantly over time. Some of the trees that I saw this past winter had so many nests in them that there was going to be no chance that there would be a leaf on any of these trees come middle of May. It's just really crazy to eat. They eat an awful lot. So they will fully mature as a caterpillar through the beginning of June, middle of June, and then they will pupate for 20 days, come out as a moth, lay more eggs. The eggs will hatch in August, and so on and so forth. So generally, that's the life cycle. Again, the major difference is that they overwinter as a caterpillar when most other caterpillars will only lay eggs. So this was issued from the Maine Forest Service last November. And it was the prediction of risk from browntail moth infestation in Maine. Unfortunately, the reddish area where it's the highest risk of infestation is Brunswick, Thompson, Freeport, Bowden, Bodenham, Bath, Harpswell. Unfortunately, we're right in the center of that. So it has migrated quite a bit outward and continues to do so. It's moved a little bit inland, but it seems that the winter climate here along the coast, which is tempered, of course, by the ocean water, they tend to prefer that. It doesn't get quite so cold over the winter, which would explain why they're here on the coast and not further inland or up north. So we'll look to see this, a 2018 rendition of this map, probably in late fall, and I suspect it'll look generally similar. In Brunswick specifically, last year we received quite a bit of complaints from our athletic teams playing on various fields, patrons of the Lower Mall and the Farmers Market, other town properties where large numbers of people congregate. Those tended to be the bike path, Edwards and Leichness Fields, Lower and Upper Mall, and Pullman Park. That being said, I don't think I drove through any section of town where I did not see an oak tree with a browntail moth caterpillar nest. So these were just the places that had the worst infestation, but nearly everywhere was infested.
With grass fields, large grass fields, if you get 1,000 feet away from the trees, is that fairly good protection?
The hares will still carry.
So they carry very
Yeah, yeah, because all it takes, they're microscopic, they're very light, it doesn't take much wind to kick them up. And if you bush hog that field, that's just gonna raise them up and they'll be carried away. Back in February, the town council, recognizing the severity of the problem, issued an emergency appropriation of $40,000 to treat the problem at our locations that we determined had the largest infestation and most public use. Prior to that, over the winter and spring of last year, we hand-pruned out nests where it's accessible. So crab apple trees where we can get them from the ground, apple trees, but larger oak trees where it's where it just isn't feasible to be able to hand prune because there's so many. We didn't do that. We also, in select places, did actually physically remove trees. Those were in locations where the loss of a couple of oak trees wasn't going to matter to the landscape or to the public use.
What is a trunk injection? How is that done?
So in May, we rolled out the next wave of our control, which included some pesticide applications, strategic pesticide applications. The bark spraying is, this is all relative, like we're talking pesticides, so they are inherently dangerous, but doing a bark spray was a pretty good means of applying a pesticide. There's not a lot of overspray, there's not a lot of wasted pesticide going into the ground and the atmosphere, the groundwater. You can get barely targeted with it, and it's as simple as it sounds. You are spraying the bark with a pesticide. The bark of the tree takes up the pesticide, absorbs it, and then systemically brings that pesticide up into the canopy, into the leaves, where the caterpillars then ingest the leaves because that's their food source, and it kills the caterpillars. Trunk injections, the same thing, it's just a different mode of application. You're, as the name implies, you're injecting the trunk of the tree with pesticide. The tree is taking that pesticide up into the canopy. And then the leaf spraying is what most people, when they think of pesticide application, that's what they think of. It's a huge tanker truck with spray wands spraying 60, 70, 80 feet up into the tree canopy. So we did do some of that. And each property that we treated had some collection of these types of things. We hand pruned in one area of a property, and then trunk injected in another. It really depended on the type of use, the level of infestation, the size of the trees. The one thing about leaf spraying is you're really hampered by environmental conditions. So you can't do it while it's raining, you can't do it while it's too windy, you can't do it too close to water. So we try to leave that as a very, very last resort, just because of the added complications of trying to do it appropriately. So the locations that we treated just graphically, it's the purple area on this map. You can see that we spent quite a lot of money to treat Browntail, but in terms of spatially, it's not a lot of the town that we were able to treat. It's just little small pockets of areas. Just in case people would ask the question of, well, what am I doing in town-wide aerial spraying, just to give you a sense of cost. We spent about $25,000 treating this spring, and that's what it bought us. It's not a lot.
How effective
How effective was it? I'll tell you. The pruning of the winter nest out of the trees and the actual physical removal of the trees was, of course, 100% effective, because we were physically removing the caterpillars from the environment. The bark spraying was pretty successful, although because of the timing of when you're trying to do it, the tree will sustain some level of defoliation that's unavoidable. Same thing with trunk injections, just based on the timing of when you need to do that. You end up with some defoliation, and then the leaf spraying, certainly. There was more defoliation that had happened because we got to it later in May, after they had had plenty of time to devour parts of trees. But overall, it was fairly successful. If anybody's been to the mall recently, you'll notice that every single tree on the mall looks fantastic, as a bright green canopy with almost no market defoliation of any of those trees.
Now, if neighbors have these trees that are on your property line and they don't do this, is it a waste?
That's a good question. It's really important to work with your neighbors. For instance, on the Upper Mall, we were well aware, and with what Bowden was doing, and Bowden was well aware of what we were doing and when we were doing it, and so we worked together to be able to target where we were doing it. But certainly for neighborhoods, or depending on where people live, I know there were a handful of groups in different areas of town that worked with neighbors to address not only your individual property, but trying to get others on board with treating their property as well. The benefit is exponential. If you just treat your property, you'll see some relief. But if none of your neighbors do anything, depending on how impact you are in your residential area, it's feasible that you would very quickly realize that there are hairs all over your property because your neighbors didn't do anything. And your trees will most definitely become re-infested in August when the female moths are laying their eggs.
I have hundreds of caterpillars on the side of my house. Well, and I don't have any oak trees on that side.
Are they browntail moth caterpillars?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Okay.
So the results were overall pretty good with what we did and where we did it.
With the pruning and removals, did you burn what you took out?
We didn't. We either killed them in soapy water so that they were dead, and then we disposed of them like we would any other woody debris. Some of it was trash, so it ended up getting incinerated. Other nests got chipped up in a chipper. There were a lot of different ways we did it. Our primary concern was just getting them out of the tree. But it doesn't have to. I gotta say there's no single good way to dispose of them, it really depends on where you are, how much material you have, and if you're just doing a very small apple tree, you're probably going to not have very many nests, and you could dump them in soapy water so that they're dead, and then put them in a trash bag and put them out with your normal residential trash. But if you're doing several large oak trees, that's not really feasible. This map is horrible, so I'll skip it. What it does is show they just did a flyover in June, the state did, to assess the rate of defoliation in the general area of where browntail moth infestations are. The red is areas that have been defoliated at least 50%. And I'll show you what it looks like here. So this is Brunswick in the center. Again, the red areas are what they could measure as more than 50% defoliation in the tree canopy. You can see how lucky Brunswick is. Again, based on the number of nests that we saw over the winter, we had almost no corresponding high rates of defoliation except down in Muir Point area. The likely reason for that is there is a fungus, a naturally occurring fungus, that kills off the browntail moth caterpillars. You need to have specific environmental conditions to allow for this fungus to proliferate and spread. And it is apparent that that happened in the large sections of Brunswick, a lot of Topsom, and then for the top of Topsom, Bowden. They all reported having significantly less amounts of defoliation than they were expecting based on the number of nests in winter.
Is the fungus harmful to trees?
Pardon me?
Is the fungus harmful to trees?
It is not. It's actually
I have bleaching. I think that's in trees.
if I recall correctly, the particular fungus that is that they're susceptible to is actually created by oak trees. So it's a naturally occurring fungus. It needs to be, the spring needs to be cool, it needs to be rainy, so that the spores can reproduce. So that the spores can reproduce. And as the caterpillars come out of their nest and start feeding in the spring, they will contract this fungus, bring it back into their nest and spreads to the other caterpillars, and there's significant mortality associated with that. And unfortunately, you cannot bottle this fungus and sell it.
I have it in all the other trees, but the oak trees.
Anyway, so as this was
Is that
just,
fungus visible?
pardon me?
Is it
Oh,
visible?
yes.
It is in, it creates a yellowish halo around the deceased moth, caterpillar. So it's almost like, what's the best way to explain it? You can see it on their hairs. It's kind of yellowish. Looking at any individual spore, but you probably wouldn't recognize it. But in concentration around the caterpillar that's deceased, you can see this slight sort of yellow tint to it. And the hallmark of the caterpillar dying this way is they'll be hanging on. You'll see them hanging from a leaf. The lower half of their body is still holding on to the leaf, but the front half of their body, including their head, hangs down. The fungus acts on their nervous system. They lose the ability to move their arms and their head, and so it just droops down. So that's how you know that the fungus is happening. Anyway, as I said, we were really lucky in Brunswick. So 2018, how do things look? Unfortunately, we won't know until this time next year, because it depends on how many nests are created in August. We'll be able to survey them in September, October, November, December, see how the tree canopies look. The severity of the winter. Last winter, we had a number of, not necessarily snowstorms, but windy storms. And a lot of the nests got tattered, just this constant swinging. They're out of they're 80, 100 feet up in the air. they're on the ends of branches, so there's a lot of sway. But we did see a lot of ripped apart nests because of that, which certainly impacted their ability to survive in the winter. As soon as they're out of their protective cover of their nest, they're much more susceptible to the conditions, environmental conditions. As I mentioned, the fungus likes a rainy and cool spring. So if that happened, maybe we would see another round of mortality based on that fungus. And then certainly whatever actions either the town takes or individuals or collections of residents, that would certainly have, to a much lesser degree, it would have an impact on the population. So that was a long way of saying, nobody knows what's going to happen in 2018.
What does it cost, basically, in general, to have a tree injected or the bark?
That's a great question. The most economical chemical treatment is spraying of the leaves. Just to give you an idea, if you had maybe 5 or 10 oak trees on your property that wanted to have sprayed, and it was easy for a company to get their spray truck there, that probably costs you, I don't know, maybe $300 to $400 to do a bark spray. The product is much more expensive. So to do that same number of trees, it probably costs you $700 or $800. And same with the trunk injections, again, the product, because it's so concentrated, is much more expensive.
And that would run the bark, the injection would run.
Yeah, it's probably about the same, probably $700 or $800 for, let's just call it a dozen trees.
Okay. And how long does that last? Is that every year?
That's a great question. If you do the bark spraying or the trunk injection, because those are systemic pesticides, they stay within the tree and get up into the leaves. The tree carries its leaves throughout an entire season, so you get the benefit of the spring protection of the caterpillars coming out of their winter nest and feeding. They'll be killed when they ingest the leaves. But then you still get that tree with those same leaves. It has that same pesticide and it doesn't disappear. So then come August, when the new eggs hatch into caterpillars and they come and they hatch and they feed, you've got that level of protection as well. So we think of the trunk injections and the bark spray as getting 2 bangs for your buck, meaning you get that spray.
You still need to do it every year.
But you would need to do it every year, that's correct. With the leaf spraying, you only get that one-time protection. It's got a very low residual factor. It washes off the leaves into graze.
And environmentally, that's not.
Well, the products that we're using are at the very low end of the toxicity scale in terms of persistence in the environment. And unfortunately, because of that, they wear off really quickly. They dry very quickly and then they wash off very easily. They photodegrade in sunlight. So you only get that one time of protection if you're doing the leaf spraying, even though it costs less, you don't have the full season of
We're doing organic gardening, so you really wouldn't want to.
There are no organic certified products that that can be used to treat browntail moth caterpillars that are listed on the Organic Materials Research Institute list that's okay for organic farming. There are products. They're more expensive, like most organic things, but they do exist.
I assume the truck injection makes the whole tree distasteful to the moths, caterpillars?
It doesn't necessarily make it distasteful, it's just the pesticide that acts on their nervous system is in the leaves, and so they eat the leaf, they ingest it, they've got the pesticide in them, and because they're so small, the caterpillars, they don't need a lot of pesticide to have a chemical reaction in their body. So it's not a taste factor, it's ingesting poison, basically.
And I assume a sticky band around the trunk doesn't do anything.
Sticky bag does not do anything for brown-tailed moth control.
Sells a lot of shit.
It would with winter moths because the females can't fly and they crawl up the tree trunk to lay their eggs. So if you can prevent them from doing so, that would work. But for brown-tailed moth females, because they can fly, it doesn't help control the problem in that manner. Also, the caterpillars are all up in the canopy of the tree, so they're not traveling along the trunk, albeit occasionally we'll see them on the trunk because they've fallen down from the canopy of the tree and they need to get back up into the canopy of the tree. But if you tried to tape off your oak trees, maybe you'd find 1 or 2 caterpillars on that, but there's about 1,200 caterpillars right above that.
Do birds or other wildlife feed on caterpillars or moths?
They don't touch the moths. For brown-tailed moth caterpillars, there's no known natural predator that eats them.
BT?
BT will act on them, yes. But it's a hard thing to commercially produce, so it's not readily available. The scientific studies on BT, which is a soil bacteria that can kill, have a resultant mortality of caterpillars, which is what you asked about. They're doing studies with it at UMaine to see its level of efficacy on them because it's a fairly safe pesticide to use because it's based on the soil bacteria.
I had some trees injected, and the arborist said that there were 2 types of pesticides they were using. One would last a year, the second would last 2 years. 2-year one was more expensive. They ran out of it by the time they got to me. And the costs were typically $200 to $600 per tree, depending on the size of the tree. They put different injection holes with a little stopper. It's fancier than that, but around the tree, and the bigger the tree, the more you need to get fairly good coverage of their vein system. And even then, it might be a little spotty if the tree has a little convoluted distribution system.
Yeah, that's right. It's an interesting thing to point out as it relates to those systemic pesticides is the results are largely based on the overall health of the tree to begin with. If you've got a tree that's in poor health and you try to either inject or bark spray one of those trees, because it has a hard time getting nutrients up into the canopy of the tree, it will also therefore have a hard time getting the pesticide out. It's just one of the main things you have to consider in terms of figuring out what you could do to your trees is, unfortunately, you have to look at every single tree and determine what's best for that tree. And it may be 2 trees right next to each other have different treatments, which is what we found with all of our properties. So things that you can do, we talked about pruning winter nests. Homeowners can do that themselves on smaller trees where you can reach them, and the nests are out at the end of the branches, so they're fairly easy to get on smaller trees. However, on large trees, like large oak trees, it's not feasible to think that you would climb up into the tree and clip out those nests. So you need to hire a tree service company to do so. It is very labor intensive, and therefore it can be expensive to do. We did do that we hired this company, Welltree, that's in Brunswick, to prune out some nests on some of the medium-sized oak trees on the upper mall, because we didn't want to inject them or spray them, and it was pretty expensive. But you have a 100% success rate, so I guess you just gotta weigh that. You can also consider removing the food sources, which is physically cutting down and removing your trees. Again, that doesn't make sense everywhere. If at your house you have one significantly unique oak in your front yard, then cutting the tree down probably isn't going to make much sense. If you have several acres and an awful lot of oak trees, or other trees to offset the loss of those trees, then that might be something you can consider. We talked about the various ways that you can work with pesticides, from leaf spraying to trunk injections to bark spraying. Certainly, if you're going to consider those, I would highly recommend contracting with a licensed pesticide applicator. And as we also touched on, it's really important if you live in a neighborhood, doing something yourself is good, but working with your neighbors to collectively do something is much, much better. This is just a snippet of what I handed out on the yellow sheet. Just some suggestions about recognizing that there are brown-tailed moth caterpillar hairs out there, and there will be for a couple of years. Strategically choosing when you go out into your yard to do yard work. If it's damp out, that's better. It cuts down on the ability of the hairs to be blown around and them becoming in contact with you. That being said, mowing your lawn while it's raining is inadvisable for other reasons. Whatever clothes you are wearing outside, I would recommend as soon as you're done doing whatever you're doing outside, take them off and wash them. I also might suggest washing them twice. I've found in some clothes that I've washed, I'll put them on the next time I wear them, or what have you, and I won't have been out in the field, and I'll see that I've got rashes on my arms, and it's likely because there's still hairs in the clothing that will come out over a couple of washings.
A neighbor of mine had some oak trees trimmed that were hanging over the house and the patios and all over. Tree trimmers came and did the work, and maybe they were summer hires or whatever, but they were doing it in short sleeve shirts and such, and they spent a good portion of the day there, and then at the end they went to the emergency room.
Yeah, I've actually found it hard, specifically this spring, to contract out for tree work that we need to have done. You know, the town is responsible for all town trees, so anything that's on the side of the street or downtown, where there's an emergency situation, they have to have those trees removed, and one of the first questions they'll always ask me is it an oak tree? Because they get a lot of kickback from their employees in working in heavily infested trees. Even if you're cutting them down, taking them down limb by limb, you just end up with caterpillars all over you, or the hairs are falling down on you. And from experience, it's pretty bad.
But how does one know how do I know if I'm heavily infested with?
If you have an oak tree, you are likely heavily infested. That's the simplest way to put it.
They don't harm me at all.
We should model whatever you're made out of and sell it, because I have heard that there's some people that like poison ivy, that sometimes it doesn't affect some people and sometimes it affects other people. Same thing, there are people that are severely affected by brown-tailed moth hairs and then caterpillar hairs, and then there are other people where it won't affect them at all. Make yourself lucky.
Now, if you take the oak tree down and assume you chip it or save some of it for firewood, what's the chip, like taking away the chips, are you transporting, possible nests?
If it goes through the
Nest
chip,
makings?
as it goes through the chipper, it'll do a pretty good job of shredding it up. If you're doing it early enough in the season, the caterpillars are still fairly immature coming out of winter. As they mature, their hairs get longer and there's more toxin in them. So early in the season, their hairs aren't as toxic as they are 6 weeks later. That's why we really try to do as much as we can in the first couple of weeks that we're able to, because any caterpillars that are still left around that are dead, although they've got hairs, they're not nearly as toxic as the hairs on the larger caterpillars come beginning of June. And just about any contractor that you ask to come treat your trees, if it's beginning of June, like they basically stop at the end of May, just because they don't want to spray a canopy of a tree with pesticide and have a lot of dead, mature caterpillars. It didn't really get rid of the problem. You get hairs all over your property now. So there is that kind of cutoff where most of the tree service companies that are doing pesticide application, they just won't do it because it's not a good use of your money.
You know, as microscopic as these hairs are and how they're so easily transported in the wind, I wonder what window screens, I wonder whether that's a problem.
I would recommend, if you're mowing your lawn, to close your windows.
Yeah.
Especially so that you don't create a wind tunnel in your house where it's sucking in air, to equalize itself. Like, it will suck those hairs in.
You got a house full of hair.
Yep. And it's really a problem for pet owners. If you have either outdoor cats or dogs that you let play in your yard, I've heard numerous people that their dogs out rolling around in the grass, and then they come in and they got browntail moth. The owner has been petting their dog or sitting with their dog, and can't imagine how they got all of these hairs on them because the dog picked them up when they're outside.
Do the moths reuse the nest in the trees?
They do not.
Do most of the old nest fall off?
Yes. Yeah, I've seen them last for about a year and a half before they degrade. It's primarily as they're blowing in the wind and brushing against other tree limbs. As they get wet, they get more supple and can easily rip apart.
So some of the nests you see in the trees might be not being used.
Yeah, although they wouldn't be in the exact form or condition as a fresh nest. But yeah, you're right. Like, especially it'll be interesting to see this winter based on the amount of nests last winter. Some of them for sure that you'll be able to, as you look up into the canopy of the tree, I'm positive that some of them will be last year's nests. But you're right, yeah. They won't last much longer than that. Though it's pretty fragile material.
So could you say that just about every nest you find on the ground is completely dead? And
Yeah.
nothing?
Yeah, and if you picked up a nest and looked at it, it would look weathered for sure. It would be grayish and not, and less white. You'd see a lot of dead members in it, probably like either the cast-offs of the skins. Because they eat so much, they also defecate quite a bit, so it would be filled with. In fact, that's one of the ways you can also tell if you have a browntail moth problem is if you stand under your trees in middle of May, end of May, you can hear it sounds like a very light rainstorm, and it's all of the caterpillars as they're eating. They're pooping so quickly as they're eating.
How big are the mature caterpillars?
It's a great question, Marie. They're about 1.5 inches to maybe 2 inches, but that would be tops. And they don't get nearly as long as the tent caterpillars. Tent caterpillars could be like 2.5 to 3 inches. But these, I think, rarely get to, I'd say 1.5 inches is probably typical. They don't get that big.
So I've heard 2 stories where someone sprayed their trees with soapy water. They had a distance sprayer, and then the next year they didn't have browntail moths.
They might not have any leaves either. I would definitely advocate using soapy water to, if you had a bunch of caterpillars on your driveway or on your door or on your garage or on the side of your house, definitely use soapy water because it will kill them. The surfactant in soapy water will suffocate them. The mix I use, and I carry around the spray bottle with me whenever not that I think that I'm doing anything, but if I just kill one, I feel good about it. So I do a mix of about a quarter, like a spray bottle, about a quarter of standard dish soap, although I use an environmentally sensitive dish soap. I don't use like Dawn or Ivory or something like that. So I use a pretty benign type of dishwasher soap, and then fill the rest up with water. That does a pretty good job. It usually kill them in, I don't know, 5 to 10 seconds. Like, it's pretty fast active. I wouldn't recommend spraying your trees with soapy water because when sunlight hits, on some trees that are more susceptible to this, when sunlight hits the soapy water that's on the trees, it will scald them. The soap and the dish soap strips the leaf of its oil. It doesn't have its protection from the UV A and B sunlight, and so it'll damage your tree if you do that. Not all trees, but a lot of trees. So I wouldn't recommend spraying soapy water all over your trees. I would recommend using soapy water driveways, houses, doors, decks.
So like the caterpillars that crawl out the window and make little nests in the corners, soapy water, because I was afraid if I just did soapy water on that and then they fell down in the garden that I have right beneath there, that would be bad. That's not.
Yeah, I guess depending on what your garden is, I probably wouldn't want to be putting soapy water in my garden. But in terms of killing the caterpillar, yes, I would clean them up after you spray them. Otherwise, you're just going to have the hairs that are still there. The caterpillar will be dead, but the hairs will still be there.
Give it a spray.
Get a spray.
Soapy water.
And what will you use newspapers
Kill
and
moths.
spray them up after you've sprayed the wall?
Yeah, you could do that. You have to put newspapers down underneath to catch them and then put them in the trash. Question about what can you do about the moths? That's a good question. The soapy water doesn't do much to them. I know, and I'm not sure I'd recommend this because there hasn't been enough research done on it, but some people will put out insect lights, zappers in their yard zappers, insect killers in their yard.
Oh.
The electronic zappers that either send out a pheromone or have a bright light that attract nighttime insects and kill them. So that would kill the moths. And you'd have for every 2 moths, you would hope that you would get at least 1 female. So that would stop them from laying eggs. You'd be preventing that female from laying potentially a couple hundred caterpillars. The questionable aspect of doing that is this time of year, there are many other beneficial insects that you will be killing. Contrast that with, again, early in the spring, one of the only things that's out that early are these caterpillars. So that's why it's such a heightened target area for these caterpillars. The later you get in the summer, you run the risk of killing other things that you target.
What about the winter moths? Would that zapper thing work for that?
It would kill them, yeah. But again,
But in the winter, are there
Yeah.
many other
there are not many of them.
insects?
So you could do that.
I don't know many insects that are nice.
There are.
I don't know if there are a lot of insects that are nice, but there are a lot of insects that provide a benefit, whether that be soil creation or food for other animals. Pollinators, like they all do their role, but they're not all necessarily friendly to.
Is soapy water spray as effective as a pesticide in an individual caterpillar?
Yes, and a lot less damaging.
Good. The nests for the brown-tailed caterpillar, I've used a blowtorch on them and various other things, dunking them in water. They seem to be very well constructed in general.
They're extremely well constructed, purposely so, because it's not an egg that's overwintering. It's a living caterpillar that's in there. They'll take, and unfortunately oak tree leaves are fairly big, so they can get it curled up several times into like a tube and then fastened at both ends with their silk. And it's a pretty weather-tight system. And the oak leaf will repel any water. It's warm in there because they've got the mass of other caterpillars in there. So it's we could probably learn something from the construction of these. That is pretty good setup.
So the nest, if damaged in the winter, what's killing the caterpillars inside is this temperature that's then going to get them?
They'll,
no predators?
yeah, exactly. I do think, at least I've heard anecdotally, that birds will eat them in the winter if they're exposed and they're a food of last resort. Once they're exposed, they can get wet, then they freeze, and that would kill them. But being inside, just the temperature itself, I think it's, they can survive down to minus 40 degrees. So yeah, we'll never have a,
They can come to Minnesota and we'll freeze them to death.
yeah, so you can't just hope for a cold winter to take care of the problem.
Is there a pesticide one can spray on the nest that will penetrate?
No, that's one of nobody's asked this question, but maybe somebody saw it, is, well, what can you do in August when the new caterpillars have come out? Can you spray trees then? And one of the difficulties is, if they're out feeding, they're so small they can hide under leaves. A tree has a fairly large canopy and you can't get the spray to everywhere where you need to. And then once they build their nest, they're fairly impenetrable.
And what I'm thinking is, in the winter time where there's the nest, you can see it, although you might be hard to get up there and clip it, you might be able to get some sort of sprayer thing up in the vicinity, but if you can't penetrate the nest, you're just wasting your time.
Exactly, wasting your time and your money into putting pesticide out into the
So
farm.
your best hope is mechanically break the nest and hope it's sufficiently bad that.
Yeah, if you can't clip, right, if you can't clip it out.
So during the winter, they're just hunkered down. They are not going to repair the nest if damaged.
No, they're in a semi-hibernation state. So their metabolism slows way down. They don't need to feed all winter. And they can ride it out.
I have a maple tree in my front yard, oak trees out back, and they're in the maple tree also.
I've seen them in maple, birch, poplar, beech. But it's not their food of first choice. If they're in a canopy of oak and it's defoliated, they'll move to, they need to eat something.
Well, there are plenty of oaks out back, why don't they stay out there?
Yeah, but you won't
Are
see
they
them.
in those oaks?
Yes.
But
And in the maple tree.
you wouldn't see them in the numbers that you see them in oaks. You wouldn't see them in the numbers in other trees like maples or beech or poplar or birch. They're in there for sure, but it's not their desired location.
From what I'm hearing and seeing in the pictures, there's no real economic reason to get rid of them. So that's one reason there's not much being done about them.
Yeah, I think, right, I would say that there are indirect financial reasons to do so. For instance, tourism. Let's just take an extreme example as if we didn't see a dieback this year, presumably from the fungus, if our trees had been completely defoliated, if we had seen browntail moth caterpillars all over the mall, I think there would be certainly businesses that would be upset about this. I know the farmer's market, I got calls all last year about caterpillars dropping on tents, people not coming to the farmer's market because there are caterpillars there. So I think there's certainly indirect financial reasons to treat them. And certainly from if you thought of trees having asset value, I mean, there's some value to the town, like it's a natural resource. And if you wanted to read several PhD articles about what the value of a single tree is, then there would be financial value of losing those trees. So that would be a motivation for us as a town to try to address some of those things.
I know a guy in Topsom who was selling his house because it was surrounded with browntail moths, and then think of finding someone to buy it if they knew.
Yeah. I mean,
Yes, they're financial reasons.
Yeah, I've heard, again, anecdotally, that there are people that have moved here a couple of years ago, within the last couple of years, that had never heard of course, had never heard of browntail moth caterpillars ever. Then they moved here and didn't realize we had such a problem, and had contemplated, like, do we make the right move? Are we going to buy over here? Like, we can't live this way. And there are a lot of people that won't go outside their home because they're so affected by them. Like, they can't sit out on their back porch, or can't go out into the yard, don't want to let their pet outside.
Well, I put my cat on house arrest.
Well, the problem isn't really moving, it just goes up and down.
Yeah, and there's no cycle like gypsy moth or other insects where over time you can kind of see what that trajectory is. There's no known cycle for a browntail moth. It's not every 7 years, for instance. It's seems to be somewhat tied to their susceptibility to this fungus, and if you have the right condition, that might knock the population back again, and then it may be some short or long period of time before it bounces back. But they're such prolific reproducers that it's not, it wouldn't be strange to think that anything that knocked them back, that they wouldn't quickly recover.
We seem to be in a hot spot here in Brunswick. What's preventing them from being along the shore, south of us and north of us?
They're actually moving in that direction. And there's a lot, they're going to go where the environmental conditions are best for them. And that would include moderate winter temperatures, a large percentage of oak trees in the area, and that's kind of the classic Maine coast right there. You've got an awful lot of oak trees, and you've got the climate that's moderated by the proximity to the ocean. They have started to move a little bit inland, so it'll be interesting to see whether that continues. They're up, I think as far as Augusta, maybe a little bit closer to Vancouver, maybe Brewer or something, but just very small pockets of it. But wouldn't be surprising to see them. Essentially, they're going to move to wherever they have a food source, or expand into places where they have a food source. And
Global warming, is that
I'm curious about how they got here. The map said, they said 1822, did they come from Europe?
So they came in 1897, they came from Europe. Probably like most invasive species, they hitched a ride on a ship on a transport container.
So how does Europe deal with it?
They have the same troubles. It's a really big problem in the UK, and they do the same things that we do. Clip up the nests in the winter time, treat them, before it's a problem. Here's the things that you can do when you contract the rash. So yeah, it's a lot of the same stuff. And in fact, the reason that a lot of what we say is what they say is because that's where we have it from. And they've had the problem for a long time.
Suggestions for dealing with the rat?
On the yellow sheet, I think is the best thing. Trying to avoid places that, and this is really hard in Brunswick, trying to avoid places where you know that there's going to be browntail moth caterpillars. Try to do your yard work on damp days. Wear long sleeve shirts, long sleeve pants.
But given you've got it, your arm is that guy with the picture.
If you know that, like if you're going to be outside, if it's 90 degrees, you're not going to work in a long sleeve shirt. I think it says on there. So duct tape. You can put duct tape on your neck and on your arms, and then rip it off, and it will take the barbed hairs out. You'll still have a little bit of a reaction from the mechanical insertion when it got in there, as well as the toxin, the residual toxin is still there, but you won't have that hair continue to working its way every time you rub against something. So it'll shorten, maybe you'll have a problem for about a day or 2 days instead of 3, 4, or 5 days.
So don't take yourself on your way when you come out,
Yeah.
not ahead of time.
No, right. After you know that you got it. And the most common places you get them are inside of your forearms, up sort of beyond your elbow into your underarm and on your neck. The reason being is you're rubbing. Whenever you're walking, whenever you're rubbing and you're working those hairs into your skin. Same with your neck. You've got your collar or your hair is working with it. So those are the most.
Picking up leaves and brush. Go like this.
Those sticky rollers?
Yeah, anything that's got enough stickum to it that you can rip it out.
Mid-Coast Hospital and some of the other pharmacies have their own local concoction of stuff that people seem to be happy with.
Yeah, I've heard great things about those after the fact applications of lotions that contain usually a steroid, hydrocortisone, Benadryl, sometimes antihistamine.
You need a prescription for it. Kennebec Pharmacy has a spray.
Yes.
You need a prescription.
Yeah.
Found out Hannaford has a concoction.
Yes.
Get 3 bottles and stuff and put it all together. It's non-prescription.
Yeah, I think Mid-Coast Hospital last year, I think wrote out 700 and something prescriptions for their special concoction. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the problem.
in maybe toward closing, back to the stage of the caterpillars, where are we now? When is the next critical time for the caterpillar hairs during the season?
I mean, it'll be bad now all summer because we've got all of the additive hairs from this year's population of them, in addition to last year's and the year before.
So even if
So
they're
it's
going-
bad all summer. It's not
Yeah,
like
so
it's
even
bad.
if they're in a moth stage or in pupa or whatever it is.
Right, the hairs
it's
are already,
there.
the hairs
It's
are already
They're
there.
got-
And, probably the worst, I would say, is between June and August, because that's when most people are mowing their lawns, and then after August, you're mowing less frequently. Everybody is, and so you're kicking them up a lot less. So it's bad all summer, it's not like there's a general overshow.
So the only
Can the hairs
safe
go-
time is winter.
Yes, right, winter's a great time.
But snow covers it all.
And the hairs go through
Screening.
Yeah, they are, they're microscopic, they will go through, so if you're gonna be mowing your lawn or you're having somebody mow your lawn, I would advise you to keep your windows closed while that's happening, just so the hairs don't come inside your house. There will be hairs on your screen, and so when you do open your windows, when you get a draft, it will likely plug them in, but it won't be in the concentration that are outside or that wouldn't have gotten if you had it. So.
Do I understand correctly that soapy water is a skin poison, contact poison?
For the caterpillars, yes.
Should I put anything in with the soap?
Nope, we just do, again, I just use an environmentally friendly dish soap. And I fill my spray bottle about roughly a quarter of it with the dish soap, and then the rest of the water. Shake it up and,
Will I kill the eggs too?
it will not kill the eggs. And you wouldn't be able to get to the eggs, for the most part, you're not gonna be able to find the eggs. They're on the underside of leaves, and it wouldn't be worth your time to.
Not in the nest.
The eggs are not in the nest. It's as soon as the eggs hatch into little caterpillars, it's the caterpillars that will feed for about 7 to 10 days, and it's those little new caterpillars that will start spinning the winners.
And you say dawn is not environmentally friendly?
What do you recommend?
Yeah, and the reason that just there's a lot of petrochemicals in dawn.
I mean, 'cause that's what they wash little duckies with.
They call that greenwashing. But I would use, I would use like a 7th generation or method. Something that's got a few less chemicals in it and a few more natural cleaners. And it has the same, it's really the surfactant that's in it, the stuff that makes it bubble and so that's the stuff that.
Where has the brown-tailed moth been for the last 50 or 60 years?
Yeah.
Because a couple of the pictures that you showed where it had gotten to in 1914 and the 1920s, and then nothing until recently.
Yeah, so it
That's
died.
about 100 years.
It died back, but there were likely some small populations here and there for whatever reason they did not proliferate.
So something about the way we're changing the environment, and I'm getting into that slide, is bringing them out.
I mean, it may be that a more moderate climate might have some effect. But I don't know, I haven't seen any studies that have said that. But
I
it
just
was,
wondered if maybe the picture was doctored
oh,
for some reason.
oh yeah, no, it's, they did die back, but there had to have still been population somewhere, just not in the number that garnered any attention.
Okay.
But it would make sense that temperature obviously has something to do with their spread and their ability to reproduce, because they're on the coast of Maine, they're on Cape Cod, they're in the UK, and we all have moderate temperatures.
What about Nova Scotia?
They were there historically, but I'm unaware that they're there now.
Yeah, or New Brunswick even.
But,
We never find that out, do we?
but if you look at the last couple of years of where they've moved, how their regionality has exploded kind of here in the mid-coast and worked its way out, then it's not surprising to think that they would you know, that 10 years from now that it would look like it did back in 1917 or something.
Curiosity. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.